It is unexpectedly one of the biggest recovery regrets that we hear from people, how they chose to talk to their kids, friends, and family while trying to heal from infidelity. Don't make quick, uninformed decisions that can have a lifelong relational impact with those who are closest to you. Welcome to episode 3 of the Affair Recovery Podcast, where we ask your questions to our expert therapists to help you get unstuck and move forward. Today, we're going to talk about what feels like that big, giant secret with what is happening with you and your spouse that can feel like this toxic weight in your life, and what you are to do with that. How to talk to your kids to avoid spreading the trauma to them, and why potentially you shouldn't tell some people, even if they're close to you, what it looks like to differentiate between what is secrecy and privacy. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host for today's episode, and I'll be joined by our founder of Affair Recovery, Rick Reynolds, and 3 incredible expert therapists, John Haney, Lori Bryson, and Tracy Brock. Be sure to like and subscribe, and even leave your questions in the comments below, maybe on what you would want to hear in future episodes. While we know that infidelity can be life-shattering, we firmly believe that you can get your life back. Here is episode 3. Today, we are talking all about what to do with family, friends, extended relationships. People don't often think this is going to be an important topic for them, but we all know it's actually pretty critical for recovery. And so I want to play a question that came in that really highlights the tension people feel with this.
It's been 3 years since D-Day. A lot of turmoil followed discovery of my husband's affair, including his losing his job and us needing to move. And because our younger son was starting college, and we had a lot of separate and couples healing to do, including my participation in Harboring Hope, which was really helpful. But no one in my family knows, no one close to me knows what happened. It's very isolating, and it's really feeling like a toxic secret now. I would like help to know how to begin this conversation and with whom. Obviously, our sons, now both adults, are at the top of our mind in this. Thank you for your help.
Well, I think there's definitely a time to, bring it into the light, only because it's part of a legacy, and also there's potentially can be used for good. I mean, certainly there came a point we were going to be on something like The Morning Show or Good Morning America, which brought a crisis about in terms of telling the kids, because we knew they'd learn at that point. But I can tell you that being able to talk with them about what our journey was has been something that has been phenomenally beneficial for our kids. And so it's not all a negative. It can actually be something that you want to redeem it somehow, and that might be one way it can be redeemed.
I would be curious as to what the kids thought at that point. If he lost his job and they moved, were they aware that there was a crisis? I mean, depending on their age, they'd have to know something was going on. I might start with that as trying to approach this as helping them make sense of that missing piece. It's kind of like there's something going on, but you don't know what it is. If that were the case, that'd be a good entry point to try to help fill in the blanks for them.
For our friend who asked this question, I want to validate the loneliness of this experience. I think this is the most isolating form of grief that I know of, and just how incredibly lonely we can be with this. And yes, at some level, so much of our healing can depend on that community and about having other people come alongside of us, and we get to choose, who that is. We don't have to necessarily proclaim our story from the mountaintop or whatever. But one thing I'm curious about in your question is, you use the word toxic in the secrecy, and kind of what was contributing to that, since I know you can't answer me right now, but because sometimes, stories can not be told. There's instances where people will choose not to tell the kids, or at least under certain circumstances and everything, and it doesn't necessarily create a toxic situation like that. But I'm with Rick that I think sometimes we can, if we together get out in front of this and choose how we're going to handle this together and present a unified front as we tell this, there can be something, the healing that happens on the the couples level can very much happen on a family dynamics level, like a family systems level, that like this actually can help us to have fewer secrets in the family and make it more likely that our kids are going to come to us. But like sometimes with our shame, we feel like, that dark secret feels like something from a Southern Gothic novel, some deep family shame that we haven't kind of put out there. And it doesn't have to be that way. It can actually be something that really spurs some growth in the family.
Great question. I think sometimes we look at this almost maybe as it's a bad thing in recovery. And maybe you're right, it feels like a secret, but I would just encourage all of us to really maybe ask ourselves, when does something, it's really not a secret, but it's actually just more private? Because I think it's a really healthy thing in recovery to maintain boundaries and privacy from telling everyone or people that might not have our best interest at heart. So maybe that's the case here, that, in the journey of recovery, if you're 2 or 3 years out, is it really a secret, or why do you feel like it is, more than you've given, it has been incredibly isolating. I'm not minimizing that, but it takes time to heal. And, we really do need to tend to our own healing before we talk to our kids, so it can be about them and not us. We never want to kind of go and tell someone needing anything from them. We want to do enough of our own healing. So kind of go, like I like to say, put our guts and, blood all over the place. We're healthy enough to hold the space with our story. So I just encourage some food for thought on that. If you've never thought about it, there is a big difference in the process between secrecy and then really what, is just privacy. I always like to say, you maybe haven't sat around the campfire of my life enough to get to hear that story. I need to know you're safe enough, and, not everybody gets to know everything in my story.
I'd just tag on a quick warning that once you tell someone, you cannot control what it does to them, the impact, their response, who they tell. So you kind of have to be prepared for that.
I also think how you tell the story is really important. You're either going to tell this story of this tragedy and just a dark story, or you're going to tell a hero story. You're going to talk about how you were able to heal and grow from this thing. So when you tell a story of growth, then it's really a story of hope. And that was what we wanted to leave our kids is, look, this is what we went through, and let me tell you what's possible. So for them, it wasn't like a tragedy. It was like a hero's journey, and I think it depends on how you frame it.
For those that are listening, I think they primarily find themselves in two different camps. One is, I haven't told anybody, and maybe that's why they feel that toxicity that this person was referencing. And the other camp is, well, we've told a lot of people and created a lot of damage. I want to talk a little more to that first camp a little bit still, to continue the train of thought that y'all are going on. If you think about just ideally how you can begin to determine who to talk to about this, because even if you're recovered, you want to be fully known. And so you want to share this with people. And so how can you, someone listening, how can they determine who they should and shouldn't talk to about this and share this piece of their life with?
Yeah, how do you discern? That's a really, really big question, because I know, and I want to speak to those of you, sometimes we just react when we're hurting and we just like tell everybody and then we're trying to rein it back in. If you did that, try to have some grace with yourselves, but that's a tough thing, because again, even the people we think are safe sometimes end up being the people who aren't. I always say that like a lot of gossip gets passed at church as prayer requests, that like you'll tell one person, then suddenly the whole church knows. Back when I was a youth pastor, I remember there was a kid in another church who went and told his youth pastor about a chronic masturbation issue, and the person put it on the community prayer list, and the family literally had to move out of town. And there can be some of this. There's such a salacious aspect sometimes to infidelity, and people will project their own sexual stuff on the story and all that kind of stuff. So like that's a big question about who's safe. And I think just kind of vetting and being prayerful about and we don't need, to tell the world. I think sometimes like getting, a few safe people. That's why, I'm, big fan of the small groups and everything too, because you have people who are anonymous and they know your story, and they'll protect your story. But like that safety is just so critical though.
I mean, that's actually one of the reasons that our online courses are set up the way they're set up, is you never know the names of the other people. They don't have any contact information. It's completely anonymous. So you don't have to worry about somebody misusing a story, but you also find when you're in a group of everybody else who's just like you, there is no shame. You can talk about it. Everybody's the same. And especially if you know somebody who's been there and done well, again, healed individuals, to me, those people are really safe.
What would you say to someone who's seeing family and perhaps in their journey, they've done some recovery work and gone back to discover that there are family roots that led to some of the wounding that was caused in the marriage? Give advice there.
So it's probably true about 70% of the time. Mm-hmm. You just don't know it.
Yeah, this doesn't tend to evolve in a vacuum. There's a reason these patterns play out sometimes, oftentimes.
And that might just go back to what you're saying about secrecy and privacy, just allowing yourself maybe the grace to have some privacy, even with those that are extended family.
Yeah, we never know anybody's motive for, wanting to know, wanting to help, wanting to perceive to help. But, I really keep wanting to validate that we kind of need to know that, there's safety, and I think there's safety and privacy with our pain. And when it comes to family, I mean, a lot of times, I don't know, they may be well-meaning, but their interests often really get clouded with what they want for us and think they should do. And that can be really difficult. It can be well-meaning interest. But it is just really important, I think, when it comes to family, just to make sure that we all and everybody out there, when we find support and community, find it in addition to family.
Another issue is the family and the dynamic. So my family was a family of secrets. I mean, my grandfather was a bank robber. And you know what? None of my aunts and uncles or my mother knew about it. I was the one who uncovered the truth and spilled the beans, which really disturbed my grandmother. But because of the unhealth of the way my family handled things, it was important for me, I felt, and my aunt actually started this, to begin to just say, no, we're not going to be a family of secrets. We're going to deal with things. We're going to talk about things. We're going to be real. We're not going to just be an image management machine. And so I think it's really variable. Depends on the dynamics. It may be really important in one situation. One family may not be safe at all. You just never know.
Yeah, but there's the opportunity in that, though, that because sometimes it exactly is that kind of, institutionalized secret that just gets kind of passed down generation to generation. And that happens in churches and things too, where, nobody's talking about the deep, dark, lurking kinds of things. And I think, if we can create some parameters of safety, then there's actually a chance to start addressing, kind of the dysfunction in the family system and putting all of that into the light so it can transform the entire family system.
I just would say that one of the most important things is that the husband and wife, they are a unified front. I've seen a situation where they told the family and his brother turned on her, but he kind of used that for the comfort and validation he got and left his wife out there. And so he would go do things with his family. She would not be invited. And this is years after tremendous work, repentance, repair. And so you have to be, your own tribe, your family. And if there's some really dysfunctional response, you need to be a unified front with that.
I think being careful who you tell is still important. In our current research we haven't published yet on Peggy Vaughn, I mean, one of the predictors of divorce is how many people you tell. And the more people you tell, the more likely you are to get divorced. Only because even if you try to reconcile, there's going to be pressure to stay or not to go back. I mean, those people will push the other direction because they don't understand. And so, again, that's why we say pick a few important people to talk to, and family may be a part of that, but it may also not be a part of that.
And we have to understand that there's a high degree of projection in that too. There's that old recovery saying that you spot it, you got it, that if for example, in a church system, somebody comes out and bravely admits that they have a closet struggle with pornography or whatever it is, it's the people who react in shocked outrage.
Absolutely.
That you automatically say, okay, there it is. That that man or woman is likely struggling with some kind of, secret sexual issue. And that's some of the very people who shame us most are projecting their own internal struggle.
There's an irony to this podcast being out and, for my wife and I talking about being honest about being past participants, because anybody can find this on the internet, but we also know that you kind of have to find it in a corner. You got to go searching for this topic and this kind of help and stuff. But one of the things we've said for us is, have they done the work? And that's what we've looked at each other a lot and just said, if this person hasn't done, and not even the work about infidelity, just any work at all to gaze into that darker part of them and be a better person. And, if somebody's like, that they haven't done the work, they don't feel safe to us. I don't know. Is that a good grid for people to look through?
I have a real basic, just, get out your crayons right now level of what makes somebody safe. And this was just told to me years ago, and I've never gotten it. And, one question I just always want to ask is, is my name safe in your mouth? Do you hold me with safety? Or another way to look at that is just, does somebody have the ability to say, that's not my story to tell? And so that's just that self-control piece that probably, if you're a Christian, it's going to go back to the roots of Matthew 18:15 of just really, we want to go directly to a person. We want to stop this third-party game of telephone hearsay gossip. So just is my name safe in your mouth? And does someone have the ability to kind of say, it's not my story to tell?
And I really like the rule that you and your wife have. If somebody hasn't done any self-evaluation, hasn't tried to look at their own humanness, develop some sort of grace for their fellow man, they're probably not safe. Tell me your story. Tell me how much work you've done on your story, and then I'll tell you how much of my story I'm going to share.
So for those, now the other camp, so those who have shared, they've talked about it with people, and now maybe they overshared. What advice would you give them on how to pick up the pieces now if that didn't go very well?
That would be me. So I can answer that question. I think one of the biggest things is you have to be patient. Because if you overshared and it caused them hurt, confusion, a burden to carry that wasn't theirs to carry, you have to own that. I had to own that. I had to be able to look at where did that come from in me. And I had to give them time and space. I did some amends, some initial amends. I owned that it was oversharing. I owned what it did to them as far as now they have to carry this burden that they should never have had to carry. And I validated their relationship with the other person. But I then had to just give them room and space and continue to be a different and better person. And with time, reconciliation did happen. But it caused a total cutoff in one relationship that I didn't know if it would ever come back around. And back to the grief word, I had to do a lot of grief that it might not ever be restored. But by me continuing to just be a different person and never put that on them, I didn't ever try to blame someone else, even though there's always different pieces in a situation. There's always context. But I was able to just make it about them, give it some time, and thankfully that relationship has been restored.
I had someone, it's a little off, but I think as you heal, and if there are people who are judgmental, you begin to figure out, how am I going to respond to them even later on down the line? I remember somebody asked me to share my story once, and a lady came up to me afterwards and just said, "How could you be so shameless? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. I can't believe you spoke so shamelessly about this." And I paused and I just went, "Gosh, thank you. That's probably the greatest compliment I've ever had." And I just walked off. And I think if you can learn to see yourself rightly, you can also respond to it. But there are going to be people who don't know how to handle it because of their biases.
Yeah, which, going back to what you said a moment ago, Jeremy, goes back to their uncompleted work, and so forth. But I think that, one of the things on a practical level, I think, even if we were that that husband or wife who just threw our partner under the bus, creating a unified front and advocating for the other now and how we're coming together and demonstrating.
Right.
I think that can not only, kind of mitigate some of that, but it can be such a beautiful symbol of grace in action, of that, like, this is how angry I was and look at us now and look at, and just being able to kind of like, defend the other and to stand with the other, and that the condemnation's not coming from within anymore. And I think just that little strategic, or that little kind of element of that makes such a difference, or can make such a difference. And I think ultimately at some level too, that like we have to accept that not everybody is healed, and we can't micromanage how everybody's going to react to this. And sometimes, with dynamics like this, is passing out in friendships and everything, you're like kind of going in friendships. Like, I always want to try to have grace for people whose own stuff is being activated. But sometimes that helps me winnow out, kind of who I really choose to spend time with and all of that, because part of the reason I have such close friendships among the AR staff is like, we all know each other's crap, and there's no need to have to hide anything. And I know if I'm struggling with something, I could come to Rick, I could come to Tracy, and they'll talk to me without judging me. And I think there's something so liberating about just kind of getting into the light and not having to feel like we have to image manage anymore for anybody else's benefit.
For some listeners, they're walking into birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, feeling all of the complexity and the pain, the toxicity, the longing for connection with their parents, their brothers, their sisters that comes with it. What would you say to them just as they're walking in with all of that?
I'm sorry. That's tough.
Right.
It's really tough. We feel that. It will change in the future. But I don't have a lot to actually say to that, except I just want to offer my empathy, and to just, all you can control is yourself. It may be a different year, say this Christmas, where you're not going to get the same connection and all that you need. And it's going to be, wonky, weird, hard. Take care of yourself, and just know that it won't always be this way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Christmas, because, as we're recording this right now, we've got the holidays roaring down on us, and I want to give a heads up to just how tricky and difficult a set of triggers the holidays can be for those of you in this kind of pain right now. And just want to put a little plug in, if if you've always been the one that's gone way out for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, if there's things you can take off your list this year and everything, it doesn't, we're not going to circle back around and be able to really celebrate big again. But it may look different this year. But one thing I came to discover, my first Christmas post, disclosure, discovery really was, one of the hardest I've ever had, but it was one of the most meaningful I've ever had, in terms of being able to kind of reset my own traditions and kind of really reassess the meaning of the holiday. But we just, speaking collectively, just want to say, hey, that our heart goes out for you right now, stepping into all of this in the holiday season.
I think it goes back to this idea, whether it is the holidays or families, it just, for all of us, it brings out this longing and this idea of something we'd hoped for and wanted. And yet we all go through life quickly realizing that, there's a little bit of dysfunction. I know for sure in me, right? Our dysfunction sometimes doesn't just walk in our family, it runs. And it brings out the hope and longing and expectation we had, and we all have to kind of wrestle with that disappointment. You add on infidelity and betrayal in the holidays, and so we're already carrying into just this awareness of just this longing of, man, this isn't really what I wanted. And it can just be really lonely, but, just like John was saying, to step back and go, okay, the hardest thing I know I've ever had to face is just being able to kind of sit in my sorrow, because sorrow is so passive. It's just so, incredibly boring, monotonous, but just be able to sit in that and let it pass. It's really still. But in that kind of desert, though, we're saying we can, if we can endure it, embrace it, find the most meaning. So just like you said, allowing it to look different and recognizing, It's not what we, hope for.
So much of what we're saying is about adjusting expectations, but I've also heard y'all say the word grace a lot. And it made me think of, I had a mentor one time who gave me the advice when things were a little bit of a roller coaster. And he said, I just want you to wake up in the morning and I want you to go in your bathroom, look in the mirror, see the two eyes looking back at you. And I just want you to say, I give you grace today.
That's good.
And I didn't want to do it because that sounds silly, but I did it. And over time, I even did it at other people's houses when it was a little bit like, I don't want to be here. And I just found it was maybe, I don't know, it helped me adjust my expectations a little bit. Talking about kids, can you just give your best general pieces of advice? I mean, thinking about the different ages, stages of kids, how to bring this up, when to bring it up, an ideal scenario maybe of what it would look like to actually talk to your kids about it. Can y'all talk through some of that?
I would just start by saying this is one area where one size doesn't fit all. I mean, there's so many variables at play with this one. Now, you mentioned the age of the kids. There's things like how much they've known, how they discovered what they knew, kind of like what you feel like they're kind of picking up on and all of that. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts with this issue.
I would look at the kids in the same way that we've talked a lot about the betrayed spouse. Every betrayed spouse has some common feelings, but also a lot of different reactions. It's even more varied with children because of the ages and the other things. But it can hit like a betrayal trauma for them. They didn't see this in their story. They didn't see this coming. So I think you've got the whole spectrum, but do be aware that they may go through some trauma, and as we've said, trauma can heal, but it gets really messy. You need help. You need community. All the same things that we have said in dealing with the betrayed spouse's trauma, some of that may apply to the children. Sometimes I think we have too much of an attitude of, it was the spouse who was betrayed because, the partner cheated on them in the marriage. But this is the children's family, so they can have so much of the same reaction sometimes, and sometimes they don't. It can be very different. And I don't know if they're, like John said, there's a one-size-fits-all. I know there are some things that are more age-appropriate, how you tell, when you tell, if you tell. So I don't know if we can cover that whole scope or gamut of information.
I think part of the issue is when people are dysregulated, when they are traumatized, when it's like the limbic brain is taken over, some hurtful things can happen to kids. And making commitment to protect children through this process, to me, is absolutely, it's just critical. The fact that husband and wife, that subsystem is in crisis, doesn't have to mean you still have to function as mom and dad, and you still have to be a decent parent. And it's really easy for kids to be weaponized through that hurt whenever somebody isn't really thinking clearly. And the kids are being devastated. And I remember once I had a couple in, and I mean, the mom was trying to keep the kids from the dad, and the dad was bad-mouthing the mom, and I had these 3 kids. And finally, I put mom and dad at opposite sides of the room because they'd been shouting at each other, but it wasn't anything new for the kids. And then I put the kids in the middle between them. I just almost equidistant. And I said, okay, I want you guys to have to choose. You go to whichever parent you want. And you know what they did? I mean, I kind of guessed they would. They sat down on the floor. They did not move. And I turned to the parents and I said, do you understand what you're doing to these children? Because what they just did, that's where they're at. They want both, but you're making them choose, and they can't. And I think that if you can understand the fact that that is so damaging to a child, and if someone takes a child and tries to keep it from the other parent because they're evil because they had an affair, you've got to understand that's 50% of who they are. And the message you're giving them is they're bad because that's their parent. People just don't understand the impact on kids. And if there's any one thing that breaks my heart, is when kids get triangulated in this. So please be protective of children.
Yeah, it's the same as any kind of a marital issue, but especially in something like this where there's so much trauma reactions. You don't put them in the middle. You don't make them feel like it was their fault in any way. That you really have to be careful because kids will, depending on age and situation, will tend to think somehow it was their fault. And the other thing is you be really careful to not parentify the child, especially emotionally. You're devastated. Maybe you have, like I had a child who just was naturally a very comforting, felt like safe person. You don't go to that child for your emotional care.
Your child's not your therapist.
No, and it is so damaging. I think through 35 years of counseling, I would say the number one profile of client I've had has been an oldest daughter that was parentified by a mother because of her emotional needs. And sometimes dads can happen to sons too. That's really should be off limits, and be very careful to not do that.
Yeah, because I've seen some horror stories too, where the boy was spouse-ified by the mother, and to the extent of sleeping in the bed with her and things like that. And I know those are extreme kind of situations, but it's just so easy to we can believe we're not triangulating the kid into it, but just like dropping a disrespectful comment about the other here and doing this there, just how quickly they can get drawn into that. And I think one other parameter I would probably suggest too is just I couldn't agree more about not making sure the kid knows it's not their fault, but not making promises to the kid that we promise you we're never going to get divorced, we're never going to do this again, we're never going to, because sometimes we'll just say something to mollify them when they're really hurting, and we don't know, especially if we're still in a crisis mode, what the outcome is going to be. So not kind of promising that right away. And I think just being able to validate what they're feeling, giving them space to feel what they're feeling, trying to invite them to be able to to talk to us if they need to.
And something I think I'd like to put it back at the first, maybe. One of the parameters that I recommend personally, and it's not always possible, but don't let the kids get involved in the infidelity. If you can protect normal, if you can keep their life going along while you deal with this, then, and not even let them know. To me personally, I think it helps them with their development. And so maybe there's a day, like we talked earlier, where we could tell the kids, but ultimately, once the kids know what's going on, they're going to want to try to help the marriage. They want to get involved in the marital subsystem, and that is not their business. So even when kids find out, one of the things I have parents tell children when they ask, I'll say, look, our marriage is our business. It is not your business, and we may be having some issues, but we'll take care of it, but it is not your business. And you need to be a child. You need to be out there having a good time. We're going to still be parents. We're going to take care of you, but our marriage isn't your business.
And I think that can still hold true if the kids are 25, 35, 45.
Absolutely.
That we may choose differently what we tell them, and there may be strategic reasons why we're coming alongside of them in their marriage or something, why we might choose to divulge something. But just because they're your kids, and even they're your adult kids, they don't have the right to get lost in the weeds with you. They don't have the right to all the information and everything, and you get to set that parameter.
Right, and sometimes you do have to tell younger children, especially if it's a really good chance they're going to be confronted with it because it's public and somebody's going to say something. You need to equip them. But if they don't have to know, they just know you're having a problem. You can explain you're having problems, whatever. And age appropriate. You mentioned what's age appropriate. Well, I'll tell you what's age appropriate for a 6-year-old. Mommy and daddy are having problems. Mommy hurt daddy or daddy hurt mommy. We're going to go get help, and but that's not. We just want you to know that we're still your mommy and daddy.
And on the flip side, I've got to say we don't want to just pretend normal either. Because and what I mean by that is sometimes parents will, particularly with younger children, just react by saying nothing to see here. We're fine if the kid's showing some kind of distress, and kids, even very young kids, have an uncanny ability sometimes to know something's wrong with their parents. Something is uprooted in the family system, and if we just tell them that they're imagining it, everything's great when it's not, we're just going to make them more neurotic.
Sounds like there's a lot of different nuances in the dynamics with kids.
There's a lot of different circumstances, and it all affects children differently. That's the problem.
And knowing the trauma can be compounded and passed around so easily in this situation, it sounds like one of the greatest pieces of advice is don't just make this decision about how to talk to your kids in a vacuum.
Oh, absolutely.
Like invite wise and experienced counsel in on this, being a key insight here.
I've been a therapist 35 years, but I've never worked with children. I've raised 3, but I am not a child therapist. And I always bring in one of my colleagues to help in this kind of situation. I don't even try to handle it with the couple all alone.
Yeah, because somebody who understands what's going on in the kid's brain at that stage of development is so important to tap into. Okay, so one of the questions that had come in, and it's focused more on, sounds like some older kids. It says, I'm about a year past my first and most revealing D-Day after being in a very long-term affair. I ended it with my AP, and then a member of her family informed my wife, leading to my current situation. I had let the affair go on for several years, in part because when I thought I would leave my marriage one day, I thought it would be easier after my children were all grown and out of the house. However, my now adult children are proving harder to win back than my wife, although I haven't secured that yet either. Some of them just won't talk to me, and they don't believe I'm not in contact with my affair partner or acting out with another friend. I'm not. I sent them each a hurt letter, and that just made things worse. They think I'm selfish and only focused on myself and my own healing. If they won't talk to me or see me, how can I show them I'm focused on their healing while also showing them my own improvements, all without coming across as self-centered?
So I just want to say, first off, wow. I hate you're in this position. However, I wouldn't just send a hurt letter. I actually use a very specific format. This is just an intervention I use. And it's, you actually write the hurt letter, but you also write down maybe 15 to 20 things that you know what you've done, what it's cost them in that hurt section of the hurt letter. Because just writing a hurt letter is just going to fly. They're not going to feel seen with a hurt letter here. And you also don't tell them they need.
And really quick, what is a hurt letter for those who don't know?
Okay, so thank you. A hurt letter it's just an acronym. It means you write down the H is what you did that hurt them. U is trying to understand what they would be feeling, what you think they're feeling. R is remorse. And T is a request for time, just to give time for them to see that you're doing the work to try to change. And that you hope they'll be able at some point to heal. And that is what you will do whatever you can to help facilitate that healing process for them if they are interested. But it's not saying, will you please forgive me? Because that's putting a demand on them that you don't need you want them to forgive for their sake. You want them to be able to heal. And it will take time for that to happen. And I think that being consistent in being in a one-way relationship and still, as long as you're not, first off, respecting any requests they're making. If they're not saying, don't contact me, it's okay to reach out and just maybe let them know you're thinking about them, you're concerned for them, is there anything you can do? But don't demand anything. Just let them know you're grieved over what your actions have cost them and you have no expectations of them because they need to be able to come back on their own.
I would say, first of all, I commend you that you ended it with the affair partner. That's the most important thing I heard in the work that you've done and that you have tried to do work on yourself. But if I could be really honest, the goal is not to win back anyone. That is too much about yourself. That really what we're talking about is helping to facilitate the hurt in other people. And so you have to do, whether it's a hurt letter, some of the things Rick was referring to, it's got to be all about what the betrayed person, and in this case your children too, have experienced. And you lay that out there without any kind of expectation or really in some way self-motivation. Otherwise, you will be just checking the boxes. I did the disclosure. I did the course. I did the hurt letter. And they can smell that a mile away. When it's really about their feelings, their hurt, their trauma, you make space for that. There's not any excuse anywhere why you let it go on so long or anything else. You actually can see that you are tending to them and it's not about you.
First of all, I just want to say to our, thank you for the question, and it's an excruciatingly difficult place to be on, the outs with our kids. That's a very, very painful place to be, and I would just add that, sometimes the level of their hurt is also a reflection of the level of their passion for you. That when feels to them like love has been compromised or hurt, it's like they're deeply wounded because there was a high degree of feeling there, and giving them their time and giving them their space and continuing to pursue them like Tracy's saying in kind of their best interest and like so many other things in this journey that, this doesn't have to be the way it lands in the end, that we see not only families who come back together, but like come back closer than they ever were, but yeah, make it about them.
And I will say that a hurt letter isn't nearly enough. If what you're about, as Tracy said, is trying to win them back, you've got absolutely the wrong motivation. This needs to be about them healing, and it would be great if they could have a relationship with you, but it's not at this point something that's the most important thing. The most important thing is that you do what you can to help them heal. You're willing to make restitution. You're willing to reform. Pay for therapy for the offer to help them. Tell them you don't blame them for not wanting to be with you. But if you're broken, you'll be safe. If you're demanding, they need to drop kick you through the goalpost of life. You're not safe. And right now, just be concerned for them, because if you can grieve over what you've cost them and what you've cost their mother and what you've cost the family, if you can grieve and be concerned about that, it does provide a road for them to come back towards you, but not because you're asking and trying to manipulate or control their response. It's because you're just concerned for them and you're loving them, and that's what they need.
I want to wrap up with this last question. We know that community is essential for healing. We need that support. When one's family or church or community or friends have been impacted by the infidelity, how would you encourage people to begin to build a new network of support?
That's a great question, because nearly always there's some that you can keep and there's some that you're not able to continue with, and you have to build new community. And so, great question.
I think for Steph and I, when we were going through it, we were so fortunate because we were surrounded by other people going through it or having had gone through it, which is kind of a little bit of the AR model. And it's like we didn't have to go out searching for new people. It was like we were this caravan on the same journey, and those relationships naturally developed, and those became some of our absolute closest friends. And what was interesting, I kind of call it my Swiss cheese model, which is it's like there were holes in us partly because we'd lost important people to us in the process, but it's like God provided these other people, and it's like we became, I guess, more complete than ever. And what was really cool is when some of those other relationships were finally restored too, it felt like we were now 150% because we were already whole. All of those holes had been filled in the Swiss cheese. But then it was really cool when some of the others came back. We felt more than whole. We just felt overflowing. But I do think finding people as you go through the journey to be with, that's where a lot of these new relationships will come from.
No doubt. And I think a lot of the processes that we go through on the dyadic kind of couple level also apply with our community as well, that there's people that we realize who wounded us in their reaction to how we did this, and we need to forgive them as well. And sometimes, we, in that forgiveness choose not to reconcile with them because they reveal themselves as people that aren't safe anymore, or we see something else in them. And yes, and sometimes they come around in a fulfilled and deeper kind of relationship too. But there's so many layers that we have to grieve with that too. And trust can be betrayed, not just in the relationship, but in, by our community and all these kinds of things, but just making real space for all of that. But one thing I really discovered is like my community, I love the cheese analogy, but my community just really expanded and deepened because of this, and the people who came into my world, not kind of in spite of this, but because of this, in a sense.
And sometimes it can come as you're just starting to heal. And of course, I'll put another plug for Affair Recovery. That's what we help provide. But as you just continue to heal and go through your journey, I even know of someone who I play pickleball with. And in between games, we start sharing, and the authenticity that we both were able to share with each other led to a great connection and a small group. And sometimes that can happen kind of serendipitously like that, but we have to be careful. It was just a little bit of authentic sharing that led to something else, that led to something else. So you never know where. I've known people that have changed churches and found a church that was a little bit more, had 12-step programs and had a little bit more of a framework around grace and the humanity we all carry. And so you never know.
Some of the people we lost relationships with actually then dealt with infidelity. And when they came back to us, it was like this really amazing kind of synergy. So suddenly we were actually able to even give to them some. And those relationships became really deep. So you don't ever know how things are going to turn out. You never know the end of the story by the beginning.
I want to end the way we always do with just inviting God into this for those that come from a faith background. For those that don't, so thankful that you were listening. But with Tracy, would you pray to wrap us up?
God, I'm just so grateful that you are sovereign. There's nothing that escapes you. And that, Lord, you also describe yourself as the God of all comfort. And I just pray that comfort for all of our listeners. I thank you that you have a plan, that you are with them, guide them in these questions, Lord, of how to talk to family, how to deal with family, what to do with kids, how to find community. Lord, these are very practical needs. And I thank you that you are a need-meeting God. And we just thank you that we are all on this journey together. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.
We know that community and connection with others can feel so complex while you're in recovery. And so if you haven't already, I would encourage you to explore our courses at Affair Recovery. There's a link in the description. And our courses are just a space where you can journey alongside others who get it because they are right there with you and they can be the support that you're missing. On the next episode, we're going to talk all about the role that faith plays and why it's even important to talk about in the first place when it comes to recovering from infidelity. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. To healing.